Everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So thank you for being here today for the board's Lunch and Learn webinar series. My name's Allison Bennett. I am the board's public information officer. With me today, I have Amy Habe. She's the board's compliance officer, and she'll be helping out with the continuing education portion of the webinar. Also with us today is Board Executive Director John Wilbeck. He will be helping monitoring the chat box and answering any questions. So just to give everyone a little heads up, everyone is going to be muted. So if you do have questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat box. That's going to be the only way to ask questions during the presentation. Additionally, this is being uploaded to the board's YouTube channel once the webinar is finished, so they will be able to access it through that means as well if you'd like a little refresher. Additionally, the slides are currently available on our website. If you visit ea.nebraska.gov, and then if you click on that resources tab, it'll bring a drop down, and if you select the NBEA Lunch and Learn webinar series, it will bring up those PDFs. It'll have several different types of them where you can type into it and take notes. Additionally, it is anticipated that the board will be able to give continuing education credit for today's webinar. But again, as a reminder, the board does not pre-approve any CE offerings. If you do choose to use this for continuing education credit, please use the email verification that I will send out if you participate for the entirety of the presentation. I won't be issuing certificates, so just be sure that if you do use this for continuing education credit, that you use that email that I send out as attendance verification. All right, so today we're going to go over some license renewals, continuing education requirements, and continuing education audits. So just a little roadmap. License renewals, we're going to go over different types, if you can do it online or if you'd like to do it on through a paper renewal. Continuing education requirements, just some acceptable activities and restrictions, as well as some record keeping and exemptions, and continuing education audit notification, as well as some requirements for that if you are selected for an audit and how to go about submitting those documents and what all is needed. And then lastly, we're going to go over some resources and materials that are available to you. And then we will go over some questions at the end. All right, so first we're going to go over some license renewals information. It is that time of the year for renewals. This year is going to be for licensees whose last names begin with the letters L through Z. The renewal system is currently open. We got that hyperlinked in there. If you have the last name starting with A through K and you didn't renew in 2023, you can still renew till the end of this year, December 31st, 2024. There are going to be some late fees. The monthly penalty is going to be $8, and that's going to be up to $80 in late fees. You can't renew online though, so if you still need to renew, please contact the board office and we will send you a paper renewal form. And so if you do renew online, you can pay with a Visa, MasterCard, Discover, or an electronic check. So we're going to take a look at that website. Again, we have that link for you. So once you go to that link, this is what it's going to bring up. It's going to have you sign in using your license number. So you just go ahead and put that in, as well as your password, which is going to be the last 4 digits of your social security number. And then you will just select renew license. And then that will take you to the next page. So the next page is going to ask you to update any contact information. If you have any updates, review it. If not, please make sure that you review this carefully, make sure all the information is up to date, and you can update your address, phone number, and email address at this time. You aren't going to be able to update your name. I'll go over that on the next slide on how to do that. But just make sure you review this and make sure everything looks good on your end. And then you'll want to just select continue. So if you do have a legal name change, you'll just need to fill out this name change request form along with a copy of that legal document that granted the name change. And you can send it to our nbea.office@nebraska.gov or by mail. And just remember to be sure that your licensee seal is updated with your new name change. So again, this is only going to be able to be done through this form. You're not going to be able to do it through the renewal. Just be sure that that is all up to date as well as your licensee seal. And if you do have an address change, again, you can do it through that renewal process. Additionally, you can contact board staff. Just let us know and we'll get that updated in our system. If your license does expire at the end of the year, so for those with the L through K L through C this year, and you emailed the board with us to let us know to update your contact information during this time, you may need to update your address information again when you're renewing online. So if you're in there and you notice that it's not updated, just go ahead and update it in the renewal system.
We want to pause for a second, or do we
Sure.
want to keep going? There's, it seems people are having some sound and video issues. So I did provide a link. Maybe we can stop for just a second and see if they can get back on.
And I'm going to go ahead and just find that.
Okay, it looks
link.
like the link did work for some, so I think we can keep going now.
Okay. And in the chat, I'm going to post that link that will take you to the slides as well. You guys wanted to follow along that way. All right, so next we're going to look at the renewal type that it will take you to if you're renewing online. It's going to give you those two options. It's going to give you the option for the standard renewal, which renews your license until the end of 2026, or it'll give you the option for Emeritus, which we'll touch briefly on in the next slide. So you'll hit continue and it will take you to the next part of the online renewal. I'm going to touch on Emeritus just real quick and then we'll get to that next section. So Emeritus Status, this is for licensees who are retiring or they don't want to no longer practice in Nebraska. So this is something you're going to request. It'll be reviewed and approved by the board. You can't practice architecture or engineering. You can't offer to practice. You can still work for an architecture or engineering firm. You just cannot practice architecture or engineering, again, offer to practice services, those violations of the act. You are able to use the honorary titles of Architect Emeritus or Professional Engineer Emeritus. So if you wish to request Emeritus status and you're choosing to do so by the paper renewal, there's going to be a box stating change to Emeritus status. You're just going to go ahead and check that and then close a one-time fee of $25. This $25 fee is just going to be a one-time fee. It isn't going to be needed to pay annually or every 2 years, kind of like a renewal. It's just a one-time fee of $25. And again, you can select Emeritus through the online renewal system as we've shown. So if you select the standard renewal, it's going to take you to some disclosure information questions. These are going to be 8 questions regarding professional, criminal, and civil conduct. A lot of these questions just inquire on if you've had any complaints or disciplinary action taken against your license, if your license has been suspended, if there's been a criminal conviction or pending criminal charges, other than minor traffic violations or anything similar to that. Depending on your responses, you may be asked to provide additional information during the renewal process. And so then again, if you do answer yes to any of these questions, your license is going to remain pending when you renew it, and then it'll remain that way until review and approval from board and board staff. So after that, it's going to go through the continuing education. So in this gray box, it's going to have specific information for engineers or architects. We have the engineer information here. So if it's an architect, it's going to be 24 hours of architecture related learning. And then it will again say to address a topic categorized as health, safety, and welfare by NCARB. So you're going to have a few options here. You're going to have the option to say that you satisfied the mandatory CE requirements. And please only select that if you have actually satisfied the requirements. It's not if you are going to by the end of the year, it is at the moment you are renewing. So if you have not, I would just wait to renew until you have satisfied those requirements. If you select the next option saying you haven't, it's not going to let you proceed with the renewal process. If you have served on active duty in the military for a period exceeding 120 days in one or both calendar years of your renewal period, that'll give you the option. Amy's going to go into that a little more in detail in her part of the presentation. So this part's really important. Just please make sure that if you have selected that you have satisfied the CE requirements that you actually have. If you haven't, your license can be subject to disciplinary action. And so the next one will be just a review of your information, making sure you pick the right type of renewal. You can review your disclosure information. And then once you've reviewed all that, it'll just take you to the next page that will allow you to pay your renewal fee or the emeritus fee. So if you would rather renew on paper, you can go ahead and contact our office, nbea.office@nebraska.gov, or give us a call, and we will send you over that paper renewal application. If you do choose to do a paper renewal, just please make sure that it's postmarked or dropped off in person by December 31st, 2024. We do have our physical and mailing address there for you. Once we receive your payment, we'll go ahead and mail you a receipt. If you come into the office to pay, just please make sure that you have exact cash or check. We are unable to take card payments or provide change. All right, so lastly, I'm going to go over inactive or retired status. Nebraska doesn't place licenses in a quote inactive or retired status. If a licensee is considering they don't want to practice or they're retiring, you can let your license lapse. There's no discipline or any penalty for doing so. It is just important to note that if your license has been expired for more than a year and you'd like to reactivate it, you can't go through this renewal process. You will need to apply for reinstatement of your license. So did we have any questions that we wanted to go over that were asked in the chat box, or anything we'd like to clarify?
We just got a question about if someone has not completed the CE requirements and they still want to renew. Is there a way to stop practicing until they have completed those CE requirements? Yes, you can not renew your license if you cannot attest to having fulfilled those CE requirements. So your options are to wait to renew your license. If that goes past the January 1 or the December 31st expiration date, you cannot practice until your license is renewed. So there is, again, like Allison said, an $8 late fee per month that you wait to renew past that expiration date. But you have up to 1 year to renew your license from the date of expiration before you do have to reinstate your license. But you must have that CE completed before you do renew your license. Pat, I think Allison just went over that. If you have been in Emeritus Status, the process for reactivating that is the reinstatement process. So it's a reinstatement application and all of the documents that, or those requirements that are required. PowerPoint presentation is listed in the email with the registration confirmation, and it's also on our website under the resources tab. And other people that are having issues with the screen, video and audio, you might have to get out of a web browser and get in and register through WebEx. I think that's it.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Board Compliance Officer Amy Hay, and she's going to be reviewing continuing education requirements and audits.
All right. Thanks. Let me get my mouse back here. Okay. So as Allison said, my name is Amy. I am the board's compliance officer, and I'm going to review those CE requirements for renewal and then also go over continuing education audits since that season is upon us. So we'll start briefly with some reviews. Architects must complete 24 hours of architectural related learning every 2 years. It doesn't matter if it's 24 in 1 year or split up between 2 years. Nebraska does not have a requirement where you have to do so many per year. It's 24 per renewal period. Engineers must complete 30 hours of engineering related learning. Same rules, same situation. Acceptable continuing education topics must be either technical in nature or part of that profession's body of knowledge, or categorized as a health, safety, welfare topic by NCARB. So for engineers, if it's not technical in nature, it must be a topic listed in the body of knowledge. And for architects, that topic, if it's not technical in nature, it needs to be categorized as health, safety, welfare by NCARB. Here are the engineering body of knowledge books. These were developed by professional societies. NSPE's link is down here below at the bottom of the presentation. You can also search NSPE body of knowledge, likely the same with the other manuals as well. And again, just a quick reminder here, as we go through continuing education, again, the board cannot pre-approve courses, activities, providers, things of that nature. So we can't answer, hey, this course looks good, do you think it'll work? Board staff nor the board can pre-approve those courses. So the engineering body of knowledge. So they look at These categories up here, there is a further description in the body of knowledge documents that break down each of these topics and give examples of courses and education that could fit within or that fulfill those requirements that they're looking for within these bullets. So this is where, if it's not technical in nature, this is where you should go to help determine if it is an acceptable topic to be counted towards education in Nebraska if you're an engineer. NCARB has a similar document. The link for their document is at the bottom of this slide as well. And they go into details about health, safety, and welfare subjects and practice management and things like that. So again, if you need help determining if it's an appropriate course, I would recommend you go back to that body of knowledge and NCARB's documentation here on those guidelines. There were some activities that were updated in the latest handbook revision. But a full list of acceptable continuing education activities can be found under Board Rule 9.2.3 in the handbook. These two were added, like I said, during the latest revision of the handbook, and they are active participation in professional or technical societies in which a licensee either serves as an officer or actively participates in a technical committee of the society related to the practice of architecture or engineering. So that's a new activity that you can now count for. Also serving as an ABET, EAC, or NAB accredited program evaluator is also an acceptable continuing education activity. Excuse me. Next, we're going to talk about web-based offerings. So these are things like webinars, videos, conferences, online meetings, pre-recorded presentations, etc. These are potentially limited per board rules. Web-based offerings, though, are not restricted and may constitute all of the hours if they are live and interactive. So if that course enables both the instructor and attendees to give, receive, and discuss information in real time, that is not restricted and is not limited to a certain amount of hours. And it also has to be a topic that we just previously discussed. It has to be technical in nature or part of that body of knowledge or a health, safety, welfare topic. But again, if it's live and interactive and happening in real time and allows the instructor and the attendees to have a discussion, really, that is not restricted at all. However, if it is not live and interactive, it could still not be restricted if it's by one of these providers listed below. So if it's by an IACET approved provider, you can find out if they are by going to iacet.org. They do have a search feature to search those providers to see if they are accredited through their accreditation. You might have to also, I know some providers I have noticed operate or do business as a certain name. So you might just have to look a little deeper to make sure you're searching the right name. But if they're an IACET approved provider, if they're an institution of higher education that has accredited program in architecture or engineering, is a professional engineering or architectural society, if it's a technical society or association recognized at a national level, if it's a governmental agency, or if it's NCARB and NCES, these providers are not restricted or limited to a certain amount of hours. So again, if it's live and interactive, not restricted. If it's not live and interactive, but it's provided by one of these 6 providers, it's also not limited. However, if it is not live, if the course is not live and interactive and are not provided by one of those 6 providers, those courses are limited and cannot account for more than 1/4 of the education requirement. So that's 6 hours for architects and 7.5 hours for professional engineers. All right, so we understand this might be a little bit confusing. So the board has developed a flow chart to assist licensees in with their determination of seeing if this course is restricted or limited, and finding that way it's just a great tool. So we're going to go through this here real quick. You start with the first box. Is the activity led by an instructor that enables both the instructor and attendees to give, receive, and discuss information in real time? If the answer to that question is yes, that course is not restricted or limited. If it's not live and interactive, you move to the right to the no box and you ask, is the activity provided by one of the 6 types of providers listed in the board rules? They are listed on the slide above, and they are also listed right down below this flow chart. So it's those providers listed in 1 through 6. If the answer is yes, it's provided by one of those 6 providers, that course is not restricted and may comprise all hours. However, if it is not, that course is restricted and applies towards the 6 hours for architects and 7.5 hours for professional engineer cap. All right, so more restrictions. So at least one of those hours, the 30 hours and the 24 hours for architects, one of those must be directly related to ethical issues of licensee's professional practice. Also, an individual who is both a licensed architect and professional engineer may use ethics hours and other CE hours to fulfill both of those CE requirements, as long as the subject is both architecture and engineering related. Another activity that has some guidelines on it is self-guided activities. So these are planned and performed under the licensee's own direction and guidance. If you're claiming self-guided activities, you must complete and submit the Nebraska Continuing Education Self-Guided Form, which is over here on the right. And this too is limited. So architects can claim up to 6 hours. Professional engineers can claim up to 7.5. But please note, these hours are separate and distinct from the restricted web-based courses that we just went over. So professional engineers can claim 7.5 hours of the web-based courses, as well as 7.5 hours of the self-guided education activity, 6 hours for architects for both web-based courses and self-guided activities. This is the self-guided form. The form has to be filled out in its entirety. Architects, does this education activity address issues concerning health, safety, welfare? Professional engineers, is this part of the body of knowledge? All of the information must be completed and filled out in order to be considered for credit. I do see there's lots of questions, and I promise we're going to stop towards the end here and go over before we move on to audit. Units and carryover, the board has a final authority with respect to the approval of courses and credits. And again, the board does not pre-approve courses, activities, providers, etc. There is no pre-approval at all. 1 hour of education, so of credit, is at least 50 minutes of instruction. So let's say today our presentation only went 30 minutes, which it's going to go more than that because we're already at the 30-minute mark. But if it only went 30 minutes, you would only get half-hour credit. If it goes 51 minutes or 50 minutes, you would get an hour credit. Credit for teaching or presenting an activity may be credited to double the actual hours. So if you're doing a presentation at a conference and that presentation is 2 hours long, you may be able to claim up to 4 hours of activity. However, the credit is only valid for the first offering or presentation. So you can't claim 4 hours or even 2 hours if you do that presentation 3 times. If it's the same presentation, you get credit for the first offering. Also, full-time faculty may not claim credit associated with regular teaching duties. These next ones are new. So participation on a professional or technical society, technical committee is equivalent to the actual hours spent on that committee that you can claim. Developing exam items for NCES or NCARB, you can claim up to 15 actual hours per calendar year. And serving on an ABET, EAC, or NAB accreditation program evaluation team, you can claim up to 15 actual hours per evaluation. Units and carryover, again, continued. All licensees are eligible to carry up to half of their required credits from the previous 2-year period. So architects can carry over up to 12 hours. Professional engineers can carry over up to 15 hours. We're going to go over in the audit section what types of documents are required if you're selected for an audit and you are using carryover. Documentation, like I said, must be provided to prove the licensee has carryover. And again, we'll kind of go into more detail with that with the audit here next. The ethics hour may be carried over. So if you have more than 1 hour of ethics education and you have more than 30 hours for professional engineers, 24 for architects, you can carry over that hour of ethics as long as you can show you have that amount to carry over. Do we need to stop and address some questions, or should we keep going to the end here? We have about 4 more slides.
I think we could probably address a few of these questions with the next couple slides, and then we may stop and just review a few more questions.
Okay. Record keeping. Licensees are responsible for maintaining their records for continuing education. Those records could include records maintained by NCES, NCARB, or other organizations. But at the end of the day, it is the licensee's responsibility to maintain records for your CE. You also, if you don't have records relating or through an organization managed by an organization, you must have a continuing education log and attendance verifications for the hours that you are claiming. The board does have a CE log template that is available to anyone free of charge. It is on the board's website, again, ea.nebraska.gov. If you navigate to engineers or architects in the drop-down menu, there's a continuing education page that is listed at the bottom as well. But fillable form if you want to use a PDF version for it, but all fields must be completed. This is the information that is required on a CE log to meet Nebraska's requirements. Exemptions and waivers. There are opportunities for exemptions and waivers to continuing education. So licensees may be exempt for one of the following reasons. Licensees who are licensed by exam or comedy are exempt from their first renewal period. So if you were licensed in your earlier this year and your license expires 12/31/24, you are exempt from meeting those CE requirements for this renewal. However, starting in January, you must start earning credits for the next renewal period. If a licensee served on active military duty for a period of time exceeding 120 days in a calendar year, they may be exempt from partial or all CE requirements. It really depends on the amount of time per calendar year. But please note, you will have to submit active duty orders if this applies to you. And this is what Allison had briefly talked about during the renewal process. When you are renewing, if you are active military, active duty, and you select that, this is an exemption you may fall within. But again, you must submit your active military orders as well. If you are experiencing a physical disability, illness, or other extenuating circumstance, you can request a waiver from the board. However, so you must submit a written request describing the situation and what you're requesting, and also provide supporting documentation in order for the board to review and potentially approve the request. And then if a licensee is in emeritus status, they are exempt from those CE requirements. Just a note, the board may, at its discretion, waive the continuing education requirement for any architect or professional engineer. All right, to summarize here, and then we'll start looking at some questions. Professional engineers are required to complete 30 hours of engineering related education every renewal period. You can claim up to 7.5 hours of those restricted web-based courses, up to 7.5 of the self-guided activities. Of those 30 hours, at least one must be related to ethical issues of professional practice. And you're allowed to carry over up to 15 hours. Architects required to complete 24 hours of architectural related education. You can claim up to 6 hours of those web-based restricted courses, 6 hours of self-guided activities. One of those out of 24 hours must be related to ethical issues of your professional practice. And you can carry over up to 12 hours. What I went over is not at all everything. If you have further questions or want specifics or want to know if it's an activity that the board has likely pre-approved, please visit Chapter 9 of the handbook. It goes into a great amount of detail. It gives lots of information and could likely answer many questions. If the handbook is available on the board's website, again, ea.nebraska.gov, under the regulations tab. I also believe under the resources tab, but there's a PDF version. If you would like a printed copy, Allison will have contact information at the end where you can request a paper copy, and it will be sent to you free of charge. All right, I'm going to stop. And before we get into audits, John or Allison, do we need to answer any more questions? I see John's been kind of answering some here and there.
There was a question someone had regarding teaching and presenting about what documents they would need to provide or what to provide for these teaching and presenting for credits.
Anything that can improve your or confirm your attendance. It could be in the form of an agenda, email confirmations, things of that nature. There's not a specific. It doesn't have to be in the form of a completion certificate. The rules state that it just needs to be able to confirm your attendance and time.
Are some questions about documentation for NCSS and AIA for audits. So we're going to go over that here next. So we'll get to those. If not, we will be sure to address them.
Yes, we do have time, hopefully at the end, that we will have time for extra questions. If they don't all get answered within this presentation, we do save all of the chat emails, and so we can answer those questions later if needed. All right, let's get into continuing education audits. My mouse will work. Okay. The board may audit any licensee for compliance with CE requirements. However, licensees are selected randomly, up to 5% of those licensee population. They are randomly selected. I think the board currently audits 3 or 3.5%, but they are randomly selected, but the board does have authority to audit any licensee for compliance. If a licensee is selected for an audit, so if your license expires 12/31/24, you will be notified after January 1, 25, and that notification is going to come by mail and email. So if during your renewal process, that is very important to make sure that your contact information, your mailing address, and your email are updated. It's up to you where you want your mail, obviously an email to go, but important information like audit notifications will be sent to those. All right, so if you are selected for an audit, which means you received a notification via email or paper or both, you need to submit the following documents for review. So records relating to continuing education that is maintained by NCES, NCARB, AIA, or other organizations. Or if you don't have your documents maintained by one of those organizations, you can submit, or you need to submit, a continuing education log, identifying those continuing education activities, and attendance verification records. So again, this can be in the form of completion certificates or other documents that support the evidence of attendance. So it doesn't have to be a certificate, but it needs to be able to prove the hours that you are claiming. The CE log and attendance verification records must be arranged in order by completion date and combined into one document, such as a PDF. So again, if you're selected for an audit, you know that because you received an email and a hard copy in the mail. You need to submit your records within the time frame required on the letter, and those records must be arranged in order by completion date. So they're listed on a CE log by completion date, and the record or the attendance verifications match that at the same time. And they must be combined into one document. If the board receives materials not in compliance with that above bullet, the information will not be reviewed and the licensee will be required to resubmit their information in conformance with these requirements. If the board, I know there are questions about this. If the board disallows any of the continuing education hours claimed, the application or the applicant will be notified of that audit failure, and within 60 days of that audit failure notification, they have to substantiate the original claim or earn other credits to satisfy the continuing education requirement. So if you receive notification that you failed an audit because the board disallowed certain hours, you have 60 days to fulfill the audit requirements. However, an extension may be granted by the board on an individual basis, but that extension has to be requested by the licensee within the first 30 days after receiving the notification that they failed the audit. And that extension can't exceed an additional 60 days. So if you receive an audit failure notification and you don't believe you can fulfill it within 60 days, 30 days from that notification date, you can't, within 30 days of that notification date, you can request an extension of up to 60 hours, which would allow you a max amount of 120 days to successfully fill the audit requirements. Again, if you're claiming hours from a previous renewal period, all the documents for that renewal period must be submitted in addition to your current renewal period's documents. So let's say Allison was selected for an audit. She was notified January 25th. That's not the date. Don't write that down, anybody. She receives a notification via email and mail that she was selected for an audit. If Allison is claiming carryover from the renewal period 2021 and 2022, she must submit her CE log and attendance verifications for the entire 21-22 renewal period and the 23-24 renewal period. That is to show the board that you have the amount of hours required to carry over. You can't just submit a CE log and certificates for 7 hours from the 21-22 renewal period and say, well, I'm just going to carry these over. You have to, if you're a PE, you have to show that you have 37 hours from the previous renewal period so you can carry over that 7. So again, if you're claiming carryover, you must submit the documentation from the entire amount of documentation from the renewal period you're carrying over from. Please do not send CE documentation unless you receive that audit notification. Again, it's coming via mail and email. If you do not receive those, please do not send your documentation. Something that we've seen a lot is licensees can get kind of in a pickle when they do courses from a provider that specifically has a statement that says they are approved in Nebraska or in all 50 states. If you see that statement, that should be a red flag to you. Again, the board nor staff pre-approve courses or providers. So likely that is not correct. And you need to do due diligence to look your due diligence of looking into those courses to determine if those are, if that is a restricted provider or limited to a certain amount of hours. But looking out for that statement might help you to look into those courses a little more. But just know that is a red flag if you see those statements. Another thing we see often is licensees say, well, it's AIA approved, so it's definitely approved and not restricted by the board. That is not the case. AIA has their own vetting process for an approval process for providers and courses. Those are not the same as what is required in statute and rules. So even if it identifies, the course says it's AIA approved, again, use the flow chart and use the rules in the handbook to assist in your determination. But AIA approval should not automatically mean that this course is not restricted. All right, with that, I am done with continuing education. I think Sean is answering a lot of questions. Do you see anything that we need to address before we move on, John? or Allison?
Let me look. I don't see. I did want to make a note that I saw from Alan about the confirmation statement during the license renewal, saying if you were selected for a CE audit, you will be notified in early 2024. We did get in contact with the company and have that changed to 2025. That was an error, so I believe we have that fixed.
I think John said go ahead. He's, I think, tackling them as they come up, so.
Right. So we're going to just quickly go over resources and materials. The board does have quite a bit of publications and pamphlets available free of charge for anyone. We have our handbook, information on becoming architects or PEs, remediation, some information on before you build. So if you would like any of these, we do have PDF versions online, again at ea.nebraska.gov, under the resources and then drop down to publications. It will pull up all of these here that you see, and you can click on those links for digital copies. Again, you can click this order materials button at the very bottom, and that will bring up an email address for me. And you can just send me an email with which publications you would like, how many, and where I can send them to. And again, this will be free of charge. We'll be more than happy to get them sent your way. All right, so that's the end of the presentation. You're going to have Amy and I's contact information here if you have any follow-up questions. And again, at this time, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and you can answer some, or excuse me, you can type some questions into the chat box if we need to cover any. A few reminders, it's anticipated we'll give CE credit for the webinar. Again, we don't pre-approve any offerings. Certificates won't be issued. I will not be issuing any certificates. I'll just be sending you guys an email verification if you participated in the entirety of the webinar. So if you want to use that for credit, please go ahead and just use that email.
Thank you for attending, and look forward to our next, or keep an eye out for our next webinars. We typically do them quarterly, so look after the first of the year, we will be hosting another one. Thank you, everyone.
If you guys want to follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, we'll post those on there as well as the website. And make sure your email address is updated, and we'll get you emails sent as well about upcoming webinars. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.